Okay. Thanks for the warning.
Yeah. Well, in a way, it's good. You get more chewing.
That's true. Better for the drum.
Yeah, right.
I waited for him after his lesson, drugs, jail. Came back to my house, he helped me put out my screen, my canopy, a little table on the deck, and some pots. And then he said, do you want to go see your student myself? And I'll see the end of the day. So I went all the way back. I sometimes I'm just on gas.
Yeah, I want to stroll for this. I know. I can't. Anything I have to I know. They like their little play.
Every Monday, I
It's not bothering me. It's been in the basement for a couple of years.
I know.
No, a couple. We got it when they were over. You know, it's a regular J and K. They use the paper.
I know. That's going to be the problem. Yeah. I think James now. What's the matter with her?
Yeah, I got a couple.
No. For the seniors right here.
but he is
Yeah.
it's little.
Buzz? Yeah, she did years ago.
Well, I work for you.
Every time
Yeah.
Yeah.
and then
Generous. Foundations that we give United Way.
It was some seniors.
I wanted
Yeah.
to go in, I'm not sure.
so he's basically stripping the kitchen. I went there and all the expensive
They gave us,
symbols.
but it's very nice. So my money to we didn't get $10,000 to pass on. We got $5,000. Oh, I sounds like a waste. I'm not sure.
Maybe we're turning Orthodox.
You're right, I didn't notice it.
But I did, because I have a mandate.
It's really.
Anyway, you know, no books. And no plastic. I put it in the morning.
Oh, well.
Books for us to pick up.
Morning.
I went as far as I could.
The CDs on your mailbox.
I saw them. If you're going Tuesday night, I have an extra ticket.
Just gotta check with Gina. I think there's a federation thing here, North and here.
Oh, there may be, I know that
I
you
think
say.
she's gonna go to that, and I'm gonna go.
Okay, good, so I'll get you a ticket.
Okay.
Yeah.
But Sunday is fine to get the cuts.
If I come to you Sunday night, that's okay. Good morning, good morning. Carol, I'm sorry, excuse me, is the door open there for the Bibles?
Yeah,
And no Bibles?
there's, the case is in the library, right?
Oh, and is that open?
Yeah, the library's
Oh,
open.
good. So we're gonna need Bibles this morning. Good morning. I was right, 2 in a row.
Right. I was gonna ask, did you get a haircut?
I did. I'm moving through their atmosphere now with very little interference, resistance. When I sat in the barber's chair, she said, "Oh my gosh." I really let it grow out.
I got an email from a colleague in Holland. He found a opening deep down in the shop. Actually, he was looking for it. I found it.
You found it yourself?
Yeah.
Nice. And what about it? Is it great?
I don't know. I've never heard that recording.
You know the opera?
I've heard it.
Yeah.
I just ordered it.
Good. I think but maybe I know. I know it to some degree. There's some good stuff in it, but Strauss and his sprawlingness.
Yeah.
It really, gosh. And I think I told you that Colleen, his wife, after the premiere,
Maybe
that's possible. They have a tempestuous, but very devoted marriage.
yeah.
Very devoted. Yeah, very touching, actually. Yeah. I haven't read it yet. Have you?
It's a novel.
It's a novelized version of her, yeah. Sort of. Into their own shapes of
Arthur did a class, a segment of music game a few years ago. And he did things on going all the way back to Hildegard from being
Yeah, but you're gonna go over it. Okay, now you're gonna go over
I'm sure I was just fine.
They want to bring back, they want to Pretty country out But that's it. So they have 9 months a year to do it.
All right, thank you. Good morning, Shabbat Shalom. And welcome to everybody who's live streaming. Beautiful spring day. One of our assistants in the rabbinic suite said the other day, sick and tired of winter. It's been cold up until a day or so ago. So nice to see spring. Hope everybody is well and enjoying the good weather. Let's do our blessing for the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We praise you, Lord our God, sovereign of the universe, who sanctifies us by God's commandments, enjoining upon us the obligation to immerse ourselves in words of Torah. Amen. Okay, so we started last week on the third of Kant's 4 questions for what can I hope, and got some preliminary sense of the categories. It's always important to me, this may be an idiosyncrasy, but I'm always looking for structure, for ways of organizing the data. Otherwise, it just pours in on us. Now, not everybody needs this, but I'm always looking for organizational principles, which just helps me gain some purchase on a topic. And that's what we're trying to do on this question of hope. I've looked somewhat carefully at biblical literature on the issue of hope, have come up with a variety of passages, but so far it's just a mass of individual passages. So what we're going to do this morning is going to be helpful to me, and I hope to you, in trying to get some sense of how these passages may fit into a couple of categories. So what I'm going to do now is read carefully passages from a wonderful article by Rabbi David Hartman. Maybe some of you have heard of David Hartman, who founded the Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, has written prolifically on Maimonides. As I think I mentioned last week, there are really 2 views of Maimonides. Is Maimonides coherent and consistent, or is he schizophrenic? Maimonides wrote on 2 topics, essentially. Jewish law and philosophy, and general philosophy, Aristotelian philosophy. And what is it that Maimonides' basic loyalty was? Was it to Jewish thought in Jewish thought's own terms, or was he interested in more general categories of, let's say, Aristotelian philosophy? As a rabbi, as a community leader, he certainly could not cast his lot in public totally with Aristotle. On the other hand, his ultimate loyalty may have been to Aristotle. If it was, then he had to conceal it to some degree in order to continue to maintain his authority within the Jewish community and therefore privilege his Jewish writings. It's not, if that's the case, it's not that he wasn't loyal to Judaism and Jewish categories, but ultimately he may have been a philosopher and not a halachic law scholar. So the question about Maimonides is he schizophrenic? Does he vacillate between these two loyalties? Or is he essentially coherent? Do the two Maimonides add up to one whole intellectual and spiritual conception? Hartman argues for the latter, that there's one Maimonides, and in order to be unified, Hartman shows, as others have, that Maimonides thinks that the study of philosophy is one of the mandates of the Jewish tradition. And if he can make that persuasive, then there's one Maimonides. The study of general philosophy, general culture, does not take us outside the bounds of Judaism, but is contained within it. As Maimonides says in the preface to the guide, I intend to gather truth wherever I find it. And it doesn't have to be limited to Judaism. Matter of fact, in my Devar Torah last night, as I was preparing it, I found a passage in the Gospel of Luke that I was going to use, decided not to, but wondered whether or not that would work in a worship service in a synagogue, quoting the New Testament. Maimonides would say, no problem, of course. If you find wisdom in the New Testament, use it. Doesn't compromise your loyalty. Whereas those who think that Maimonides is schizophrenic would say that he dare not use that in his halachic or Jewish presentations because though he has a commitment to general philosophy, he means to conceal it. The secrets of the Guide for the Perplexed, a cottage industry in its own right. This whole issue of esoteric interpretations in Judaism, not just in Judaism actually, in general philosophy. Spinoza says in the preface to the Tractatus, if you're not with me in terms of the power of philosophical thinking, stop reading right now. So this is a very, even Aristotle has a notion of esoteric. There's a question about whether Plato is tending toward esoteric literature. So it's a fascinating topic. Leo Strauss, for those who are interested, has a book with the title Persecution and the Art of Writing. Think about that title. If philosophers are going beyond the boundaries of what's acceptable to their society in their search for truth, and they don't want to be persecuted, they have to conceal their doctrines. In other words, write only for the few who can understand it, and not for the many who, though they might understand it, would now assail the philosopher for writing it. So there are a lot of reasons for writing esoterically, right? Persecution and the art of writing. And in that essay, he has an introduction, a very elegant introduction, and then he essays on three philosophers, Maimonides, Spinoza, and I think Judah Halevi. I can't remember. But if you're interested in a magnificent piece by maybe the greatest Jewish philosopher of the 20th century, Shlomo Pines, the guy who translated the Guide for the Perplexed, was once asked by somebody, who are the great 20th century Jewish philosophers? And evidently he answered like this. Let me think about it a little bit. His difficulty in identifying philosophers is that he wanted to distinguish Jewish philosopher from Jewish thinker, Jewish philosophy from Jewish thought. Jewish thought entails or leads to an exposition of the thought of a particular thinker, or a thinker's thought about Judaism, whereas philosophy is interested in the truth of that thought. Not just that somebody thought it, but is it true? And so the question to this guy, this translator, was, I know there are a lot of thinkers, Martin Buber, Franz Rosenzweig, Emil Fackenheim, Hermann Cohen, and so on, but are they philosophers? Are they interested in the truths of Judaism other than what are they? And the only name he could come up with was Leo Strauss, who taught for many years at the University of Chicago and then went to what's the name of that college in
St. John's.
St. John's? Excellent, very good. Yeah, and taught there for a while. Yeah, at St. John's, I had a friend who went to St. John's. They just didn't only study Spinoza's, Galileo's speculations and laws. They actually replicated the experiments. You're not just reading about it there, you're really doing the stuff that the people in the past did. It's a fascinating approach. Anyway, Hartman is one of those, he has a book called Judaism and Philosophical Quest, Torah and Philosophical Quest. You can see that captures the two disciplines of the Torah, Judaism, philosophical quest. And he tries to show that the two are one. Okay, long digression, but a fascinating one, I think. Stuart?
Didn't Luther say, must the devil have all the good tunes?
Very good, yeah. I think it was Luther. So how do you apply that here?
You were saying that Maimonides felt that all the world, Aristotelian and non-Aristotelian, was fodder for his philosophy.
Namely, that Aristotle and the others had all the good views, all the good.
Right.
Yeah, and let's get some in Judaism too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, I think Maimonides. That's a lovely thought. I think Maimonides actually thought that given that Judaism is both a philosophy and a legal system, that really it was superior. I mean, nobody has ever sung songs to Aristotle's metaphysics at the Friday night dinner table, right? So, when you have rituals of communal integration, communal continuity, the reach toward the divine. I mean, Aristotle reaches toward the divine too. So that has some advantages and a completeness that simple philosophies do not. Imagine trying to put to music Spinoza's Tractatus. That really wouldn't work. What are the holidays that come out of Aristotle's De Anima, on the soul? Yeah,
I don't
Vivian.
want to divert your line with this question, but could you not argue that books are transactions with readers, and they rise to the requirements of readers, or books rise to their readers?
You mean?
Or readers rise to their books, excuse
Well,
me.
readers' rise to the book would be different.
Yes, I got that back.
You're saying that readers rise to the books.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
And
Because
are
that's what-
limited by the parameters of the books as well?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. You can break through with interpretation, which we do every week.
Yeah.
Every time
yeah.
you open this book, there's something else there, and it rises. This rises to where I'm gotten backwards, but we rise to this.
So Vivian is making the point, as I understand it.
I know I keep going backwards, but I'm
The
trying to
book
make-
is open-ended to some degree, and the readers can find there what the readers need.
Right.
Is that your point? Is that what you're saying? The book is open-ended, and the readers rise to the book they need?
Well, I think it's a transaction that you can extract from reading, or things are written for the readers to rise to.
Yeah.
So when you, I'm.
It just depends on what you.
Us up in knots, but.
Okay, I'm not sure I'm getting you. I mean, books have limits. You can't find everything in Aristotle's metaphysics, even if the reader needs it.
No, it's not that you can find everything, but the reader rises to the extent that the reader can, the reader rises to the book.
Excellent.
So-
No, I think that's very true.
Right.
Given that the book doesn't say everything, but
Right.
may have a lot of profundities. Of
So
course.
an argument whether a book is limited or schizophrenic in
Right.
viewpoint
Right.
doesn't really matter, because as I'm saying, it's a transaction with the reader.
It's a transaction, but you can't find non-Euclidean geometry in Euclid.
No, no, they're not open-ended like that.
Right. Good. Although great books have a depth and a complexity that can attract readers down through the ages from different points of view. That's for sure. That's for sure. And some books, that's, I guess, the definition of a classic. A classic can adjust itself to the needs of readers down through the ages, though it can't do everything. Is Homer's Iliad a celebration of war, or is it a critique of war? Can it do X and not X? Celebrate war and critique war at the same time? And I think the book is great enough to be able to do both. Let's just think about it. I mean, when you read the Iliad, it's just one battle after another. Of course, the genius of Homer makes each battle unique and interesting, but it's just bloodshed all the way through. When you look at the similes in the Iliad, they're all many of them are pastoral. So the similes, this is like something else, can be read as a critique of the emphasis on war. And in this sense, you can find two opposite things in one book, depending on the needs of the reader. You know, if you're celebrating war, you're celebrating heroism, courage, you can find that in the Iliad. If you're interested in a critique of war, a serious one, you find that as well. I mean, who's the real hero of the Iliad? It's not Achilles, it's Hector. It's the Trojan fighter. And Homer paints him oftentimes in domestic scenes with his wife and with his son. So Achilles' main vocation, we might say, is to be a warrior. Hector's main vocation is to be a citizen who was called to war and had to go because he was the main warrior. So you think that the orientation of the Iliad is Greek, but it's really not, at least as I see it. The very last phrase of the Iliad, 24 books, is Hector, tamer of horses. It's a strange ending for a Greek-oriented book. So even though Achilles is the main person in the Iliad, isn't he? I mean, he has a fight with Agamemnon and sulks in his tent for, 5/6 of the book. You know, they keep calling him back and so on. And finally, when his friend Patroclus gets killed by Hector, he comes out of self-imposed exile. And just that description points out how huge the book is. And we can find in it all kinds of things. Okay, so what I'm going to do is we're going to talk about this essay by David Hartman. The title of it is Sinai and Exodus, Two Grounds for Hope in the Jewish Tradition. Two paradigms of hope in the Jewish tradition. I think this is a very exciting essay. That's why I want to spend some real time on it. So you'll interrupt. We'll talk along the way. I don't intend to just read for another hour or so. Hope he begins, is a category of transcendence. Now, first we have to define transcendence. Transcendence can have a vertical or a horizontal dimension. Transcendence can point to God, right? Something beyond the empirical world. He's using it here in its horizontal sense, transcending our particular moment in time and our orientation in this moment. So, transcendence can point to God and the eternal verities, let's say, and it can point to the future. Transcending the present. Okay, I think that the second is the way he's using it. But he's going to come to the first before too long. Hope is a category of transcendence, by means of which a person does not permit what he senses and experiences to be the sole criterion of what is possible. I look around me, I see nature, I see history, I see where we are in our moment in society, and I ask myself, is this enough for me to have what I need? So he's saying that hope is a category of transcendence by means of which a person does not permit what he senses and experiences to be the sole criterion of what is possible. Okay? I look at our politics today and I ask myself, what is possible? And some people say, I can still be optimistic about the future of democracy. And some people say, well, wait a minute. Look at what's going on. How can you think that there's a possibility beyond the realities of our political situation? That's the question. It is, this category of transcendence, the belief or conviction that present reality does not exhaust the potentialities of the given data. There's more that's possible in what I perceive to be our condition, more that's possible than I might think. Hope opens the present to the future. It enables a person to look ahead, to break the fixity of what he observes, and to perceive the world as open, textured. The categories of possibility and of transcendence, this one, not this one, interweave a closely stitched fabric. Hope says that tomorrow can be better than today. Hope, however, is not merely an expectancy which draws its nourishment from the future, while integrating and permeating the present. Hope is about the future, and my thinking about, my embracing hope brings the expectancy for a future into the present. It's now that I entertain hope. Let me read it again. Hope, however, is not merely an expectancy which draws its nourishment from the future, while integrating and permeating the present. It comes into the present. It may have its roots in memory. So now we have three categories: past, present, and future. And in the present, I can draw on hope from the future. I think the future can be better. And I can draw hope from the past. Thus, the present can be influenced by two perspectives of time, which create the capacity to transcend. I'm nourished from the past and from the future. The future may be a source of hope, which encourages a person to overcome present despair. And the past, or our memory of accomplished events, may provide a key for opening the present beyond its givenness. Things can be better in the future. So I draw hope now from that sense that the future can be better. But I can also draw hope from those accomplishments in the past which give me some justified belief that I can do something like it again in the future. It's already happened. If somebody asks me to give a proof of a certain geometrical theorem, I'd like to know whether anybody did it before. If nobody was able to give a proof of this theorem before, how do I know it's even possible? If it's been given before, I now know it's possible, and it can then be done again. You see the point here? Our memory of accomplished events may provide a key for opening the present beyond its givenness, and may escort a person from the past to the given of today. Now, where am I? One can describe two aspects of hope. So, he's now talked about one kind of orientation, temporal. Hope today can draw nourishment from two different sources, future and past. Now he's going to talk about two kinds of hope. One can describe two aspects of hope. The courage to bear human responsibility, to persevere in partial solutions, and to accept the burden of living and building within contexts of uncertainty. In other words, I can call upon human attributes and say, I have hope that we can create a better future. That's the idea here. One source of hope is in human capacity. Let me read it again and see if that makes sense. The courage to bear human responsibility, to persevere in partial solutions. I want to make things better. I think I can, but I can see I can only get part way there. And I might get discouraged. I've made a little progress. I'm not sure if I can make more. So I stop trying to make progress. Can we persevere with partial solutions? If we can, that emboldens our sense that we can do it, and to accept the burden of living and building within contexts of uncertainty. These are all things that are required if I feel that we human beings can craft a better future. Living with partial solutions, living with uncertainty, I don't know if I can accomplish it, so on. The second idea, the expectancy of a future resolution to all human problems, a perfect solution. The first aspect might be called Halachic Hope, using Jewish categories such as laws and values to help to create a society that is better than it is now. Right? What's Jewish law? What's law for? Just to get me to stop at a red light so I don't kill you and I don't get killed? Or to serve as a kind of model to even better versions of society through ordered human behavior? So the first, human responsibility, can be understood as halachic, law. And the second, radical hope, full resolution of the human condition. The first, human, is partial. Maybe we can get there, maybe we can't. We're going to try. We have confidence in ourselves. The other is a leap to perfection. Radical hope, suggesting what Gershom Scholem, in a really masterful essay, called, what's the name of that essay? It's in The Messianic Idea in Judaism. It's a wonderful book. The second, suggesting what Gershom Scholem calls the restorative, I'm going to restore something that has happened in the past, versus utopian. The second, a perfect solution, is utopian. And as I've said before, the Greek word utopia means nowhere. The first, the halachic, he's not saying that one is Jewish and one isn't. They both can be found in Judaism. That's what he's going to try to show, with their sources in the Bible. So our topic is the idea of hope in the Bible. So far he's laying out the categories, and then he's going to try to show how they originate in basic biblical paradigms. I hope you find this as exciting as I do. I mean, this is, I think, really masterful to try to do this, to give a map of hope and to show its origins in the Bible. The first, the halachic form of hope, liberates action. I'm called to act in a certain way. You shall do this, you shall do this, you shall do this. And if I have trust that these actions can lead to something, I'm called to action. It liberates action. The halachic calls me to action. It frees one to act, for it overcomes the paralysis of dejection. I have hope that I can accomplish something. And to the degree that I have that hope and see the means, the categories of the Jewish tradition, I'm likely not to become dejected, because I feel that this system of ours can really move us to an important, felicitous future. Where one's outlook is thoroughly hopeless, and where the notion of duty appears meaningless, one's capacity to act is impaired. If I'm depressed, if I keep saying we tried to mount democracy, it keeps falling apart, we're trying again, no, democracy is going down the tubes. I'm dejected. If I feel that our efforts can't yield something stable. A prospect of attainment generates strength, while despair incapacitates. Expectancy that something new and good may occur often creates the very power necessary to implement one's goals. My attitude will help me to deploy the resources of the Jewish tradition, even at times of uncertainty and only partial solutions, and also when things go backwards. The other form of hope, what Scholem calls radical, utopian, need not address itself to action. It is a kind of messianic anticipation, or a belief in redemption, which lends itself to waiting. I don't act, I wait. I hope for an inbreaking into history of some divine source. That's another source of hope. And now he's quoting Gershom Scholem. The redemption is in no causal sense a result of previous history. It's going to happen. It's just going to happen. It is not the product of imminent development, things that we do here, imminently, here as opposed to beyond, such as we find in modern reinterpretations of Messianism since the Enlightenment. This is an important sort of sidebar issue. This whole notion of Messiah, messianic expectation, the creation of ideal circumstances, has, through the Enlightenment, become secularized. Who's in charge of the Messiah in any thought? God. God sends the Messiah, some magical, mystical figure. When you no longer can believe in that somehow the divine realm is going to erupt into history, Messianism doesn't go away. It becomes secularized. What's the Enlightenment all about? Creating a perfect society, now based on reason, now based on science. Science can solve the millennial human problems. That is a secularized understanding of a hitherto religious topic. That is messianic thinking that we can create a kind of utopia. Doesn't go away when society becomes secularized. Zionism is a messianic movement, isn't it? It's an attempt to solve the Jewish problem. The Jewish problem is we live among anti-Semites. And even though they make nice for a while, they really don't intend to continue to make nice. France liberated the Jews out of the French Revolution, and then virulent anti-Semitism arose in France 100 years later, leading Herzl to feel there's no solution any longer to the Jewish vulnerability in Christian Europe. So we can solve the Jewish problem by taking the Jews out of danger. Of course, that's one version of Zionism. Another version is to normalize Jewish life, right? And not to make us merely Luftmenschen, people on the go that are thinking thoughts and so on. We can actually get our fingernails dirty again by creating a new relationship between Jews and soil. That's another messianic notion. I can not only solve the Jewish problem of Jews and anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic Europe, but the unnatural status of the Jewish being, shopkeepers, book people, and how best to normalize the life of a people than to take them back to the soil, to work the ground, and so on. Okay, so Messian, this whole notion of the Messiah can be secularized as well. Okay, I want to skip a few pages here. The title of this section of Hartman's, I'm not reading the whole thing, of course, is Two Memories of Hope. Now he's reaching for the past, for paradigms. We have so far presented two different approaches to hope and messianism. One which anticipates final resolution, reaching the golden age, the emergence of a new man and of, all right, hold on here, where am I? Here I am. The creation of a new man and of a new history, and which often awaits redemption irrespective of human action. That's the second form of hope. And the other which insists upon teshuva. What is teshuva? Not only I'm sorry for what I did, but I resolve to do better the next time. So teshuva lays the ground for directing our best efforts in the future. The one notion of hope does not depend upon human action. The other depends upon teshuva, turning back toward fundamental resources, which expects the enrichment of human spiritual possibilities, but which guarantees no final resolution. These two attitudes of redemption and to hope may have their roots in two dissimilar historic memories. One attitude, and here come his paradigms. One attitude may emerge from consideration of the Exodus story, the other from the Sinai story. So the Exodus story is contained in the book of Exodus. The Sinai story is contained in the book of Exodus as well. So what he is implying, without saying so, is that here, in some sense, the book of Exodus emerges as the most important book in the Bible. It creates the fundamental paradigms for hope in the future. The former, the Exodus story, undergirds, and here's a word he italicizes, a rupture concept of history. A break, a new break, a discontinuity, a rupture in the historical timeline. The Exodus story undergirds a rupture concept of history. The latter, the Teshuva model, the Halachic model, a covenantal concept of history. So he is introducing all kinds of interesting categories into his understanding of hope. Gary?
I'm not sure I understand what his rationale is for the use of rupture here. It's a transition from slavery to freedom. I guess it's kind of an overstatement to say that it's a rupture.
Okay, good. All right, so Gary's question is it fair to use the idea of discontinuity, of rupture, of something brand new? Is it plausible to use that category in describing the Exodus? And Gary is saying, you're saying that in some way we can see continuity there and not rupture. So what we're going to do in a minute is we're going to go back to the Exodus story to see whether or not Hartman's claim is viable. We're going to test Gary's worry about the use of this word. That's why we're going to go. That's why we're going to go back. Jim?
But what I'm hearing in the last 5 to 10 minutes is a description of negotiation, because you started out saying, we hope to do this, but if we don't get all the ways that we're pursuing, I think that's what you said. But that's what a negotiation is.
Say that again. I didn't understand what you're saying. We're hoping.
I thought you suggested that what we hope for, if we think we can't get there, we're not going to bother at all. But I think what we're really describing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is simply a negotiation, be it within ourselves, or with God, or with the current state of the society we're in. In other words, you aim for more than you possibly can get. Stuart should know that, being a lawyer. You ask for $10,000 in the settlement, hoping you get 5. Life is a negotiation, and hopefully you're aiming for something for more than you know you can get.
Well, look, it strikes me, Jim, that you're imposing the idea of negotiation on this, which may be appropriate and may have power. I think that in a way it's more existential, that we might cast our lot. We might say, we human beings, what did Madison and Jefferson and John Adams do? They thought that we could really create the foundations of a society that is going to explore human dignity, human possibility, liberty, equality, fraternity. And they took a shot. And when is that shot over? When do we give up on it? I guess the answer is never. On the other hand, as we're making our efforts, let's suppose we start there, and we arrive at a point unpredicted, I'm not sure I can do this. Maybe, so what are the alternatives? The alternatives are despair. I can't do it. Nothing good's going to come of it. But I might also, in my ideological quiver, have a sort of a view of the inbreaking of God into history. And I say, I might despair, or I might say, but I have another kind of hope as well. I'm not sure it's a negotiation. It's a matter of where these processes lead and how one decides what to do next.
But Jews in the diaspora, such as us.
Yes.
Okay. We've had to succeed or to live a decent life, we've had to acclimate to the society we're in.
Yeah.
So our hope may be to do whatever our religion calls on
Us to do.
but we're constrained by the reality of what we can do. We have to live in this non-Jewish society. And so obviously we start attaining some of the characteristics
Oh, yeah.
which offset what our original goal is.
Oh, well, sure.
But we keep pursuing it anyway.
Pursuing what's the it?
A complete Jewish life.
A complete Jewish life. Right.
But we can't do it because we're here.
What do you mean we can't do it?
I in business can't do it 24/7.
Oh, I see what you
I'm
mean.
dealing with 99% non-Jewish people.
Yeah. I think the question is less what can we accomplish than what energizes us.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It doesn't stop me. I keep trying, but I'm well aware I can't get there.
And that's the halachic understanding of it. Partial solutions, uncertainty. Are you at some point when you can't accomplish all that you might want to, do you despair? No.
No, because there's tomorrow.
There is tomorrow only if, I might say, you embrace the halachic approach that we human beings have resources on the basis of which we never give up. That's an attitude. There's another attitude that you could embrace. I hope that maybe it's time for God to send the Messiah. Please, I've given up. I can't. That's not your choice. In other words, in the arsenal of Jewish ideas are these different categories, and our disposition, our own particular way of living in the world. Which, how much can we sustain hope? Do we have depressive characteristics? Do I see some evidence that we can accomplish something? How much do I believe in God, really in a way God coming to the rescue is in the Jewish arsenal. But it's not necessarily in each of our arsenals. I take it, if we were to make a little survey here, talk about how hopeful is each of us. Let's say, just to take the issue of democracy, I don't want to get too political here, but how much hope do we have about that? We go around, and I imagine if we array ourselves on a continuum, no hope, perfect hope, we would find each individual in the room somewhere on that continuum, because this is personal. And of those who are lower on the continuum, very little hope, the question might arise, well, do you hope for something else than what we human beings can do, like God sending the Messiah? Then we'll do another continuum. Of those people, some of them may have a belief that when things get terrible, God's going to send the Messiah. That's one view of the Messiah. Redemption will come, according to the rabbis, one quote, when either all Jews observe Shabbat 2 weeks in a row, or no Jews observe Shabbat 2 weeks in a row. The first is halachic. We can do it. All we have to do, folks, how hard could this be? Light candles and come to shul. And let's suppose we're the entire Jewish people right here. Come on. I'll point to somebody. I'm not going to point to him. You observe Shabbat? No. Do it. If all of us do it, we're going to bring the Messianic age. Or if nobody does it, that is Messianic thinking. That things will become so terrible that we'll force the Messiah to come. Right? So that these different paradigms are available to the Jewish tradition, and it depends upon how we're arrayed on the continuum. You think that's a response? I mean, we're always thinking it through. What should I do next? For what can I help? So maybe that's part of the negotiation you're talking about. I'm always trying to figure out what to do next, right? Somebody gives me a problem to solve. I can't solve it. So I have some choices. I'm going to try again tomorrow. Good night's sleep. Or I'm going to call somebody to help me. I'm going to give up. You do it. I can't do it. My teacher gives me a problem in math. I work hard on it. I believe halachically I can do it, so to speak. And at some point I give up. So I go to my teacher and say, well, what is the solution? That's the Messianic way, so to speak. All right. Now, so we have these two categories here. So he says here, the Jewish tradition provides many collective recollections, many pasts, many things in the past. In order to organize and to rationalize his experience, a person may select from his store of memories. Now, these are not just personal memories, but collective, communal memories. Those events, and by the way, this is an argument for the uses of the past. Why study history? His answer is, history contains options. And if we study history, we see what our options are. Here our options in terms of hope are two major options. And it's important for a community like ours to study our history, to know what's available to us in the present as resources for living the best life we can. I would like to have written the Critique of Pure Reason. Why should I waste my time trying? Not that I could do it. It's already been done. Let me look to the past for the insights in the Critique of Pure Reason. That's this argument. At different times and in various circumstances of one's life, different events may be chosen. Indeed, phenomenologically speaking, in terms of the phenomena, religious practical systems are often tied more intimately to collective memories than to metaphysical beliefs. This is a really interesting idea. Judaism relies more on the stories of our past than philosophical speculation. Who was it who said, somebody said, that Jewish philosophy always takes place in periods of acculturation, when we live among people who are doing philosophy. The Golden Age of Spain, Alexandrian Greece, Alexandrian Egypt, 19th century Germany. We lived in a culture which featured philosophy, thinking in conceptual categories. But Jews left to themselves would never, according to this view, have done philosophy. It's not native to Jewish culture. We always do it when we're borrowing from those among whom we live. Rather than metaphysical speculation categories, we've always told stories. Our theology is in the Haggadah or in the prayer book. and not through speculation. That's the point he's making here. Phenomenologically speaking, religious practical systems, I think he means like Judaism, are often tied more intimately to collective memories than metaphysical beliefs. History and not philosophy. Okay, now, the first paradigm, the Exodus. And I'm thinking about Gary's question here, because he's going to make the point that this is a model of rupture. And Gary is questioning the adequacy of that idea. Despite the presence of various themes in the biblical story itself, the memory of the Exodus from Egypt provides a theological model where human beings are basically helpless before God. So part of the cogency of his rupture view is whether or not the story presents a situation of helplessness. And I take it, Gary's point is going to be, that's an exaggeration. There was not full helplessness. People in no way warrant their redemption, nor do they cooperate prominently in their deliverance. This is a story where human beings can't help themselves. This is his view. In this model, God suddenly breaks into history, and from a no people, we're not a people yet, God creates his elected community. Okay? The empirically given in no way defined the historically possible. It looked like a situation of despair. And so they could not see any possibility emerging from their situation in Egypt. This is what he's saying. The Exodus rupture in history suggests sudden surprise where something totally new balloons, unforeseen and unexpected. I'm going to underline some of these words, and when we go back to the Bible now, we're going to see whether or not these words apply. Something totally new, unforeseen, unexpected, sudden surprise. The empirically given in no way defined the historically possible. So we have to look at the situation, the empirically given. Nothing in the observable process of history offered one reason for anticipating this unprecedented redemptive moment. See the case he's building here? The Exodus account describes how God chose to act after man's efforts had failed. That's crucial. Does the Exodus story in its early chapters show us does it show us two things? One, human action, human attempt, which failed. The empirical situation was totally bleak and indicated no ground for hope, dream, or redemptive expectation. So he's building a strong expectation for us as to whether this view is plausible. Okay? So let's go back to the story. I want to read several passages and see if the Bible story is adequately described by Hartman's very, very severe, intense language. Right? Nothing historically possible, sudden surprise, totally new, unforeseen, unexpected, no possibility, where human action has failed. Okay. Exodus chapter 1. So let's look at these passages and then let's ask the question, had he made his case, or is Gary's critique cogent? Chapter 1, verse 8. A new king arose over Egypt who didn't know Joseph. And he said to his people, look, the Israelite people are much too numerous for us. Let us deal shrewdly with them, so they may not increase. Otherwise, in the event of war, they may join our enemies in fighting against us and rise from the ground. So they set taskmasters over them. I'm going to make a few comments along the way. Stop me if I'm going too far, or if I'm getting it totally wrong. So they set taskmasters over them. The Israelites are totally passive here. To oppress, that is not yet, they tried and failed. But at least they seem to have been rendered passive. So they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. And they built garrison cities for Pharaoh, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they increased and spread out. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. Human action, human resolve, persistence. Model 1, human capacity.
Like Ukraine.
Like Ukraine. Very good. Okay. So model 2, hope in God, let's say, is not being expressed here. It's rather model 1. Human beings are persevering. The Egyptians ruthlessly imposed upon the Israelites the various labors they made them perform. Ruthlessly they made life bitter for them with harsh labor at mortar and bricks and so on. The king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives. Now we're not sure whether these are Hebrews or Egyptians who are midwives of the Hebrews. It doesn't matter for our purposes because the question is the efficacy or lack of efficacy of human action to solve its problems. Okay? So looks like this is model 1, human efficacy. The king of Egypt spoke with the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah, and the other Puah, saying, when you deliver the Hebrew woman, look at the birth stool, it's a boy, kill him as it will live. The midwives, fearing God, did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. They let the boys live. Okay, if they're Hebrew midwives, fearing God makes sense. They have a belief in God and they take action. If it's the Egyptian midwives, fearing God here, if you take it in the Jewish sense, the God of the Jews, fearing God here may be a use of conscience. So you have human action based either on boldness because you believe in God, or something more general, human conscience. So we're building a case here for human efficacy. True? So the king, verse 18 of Egypt, summoned the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing for letting the boys live? And the midwives said to Pharaoh, they come up with an explanation, how clever, how ready with a response to a dangerous situation these human beings are. The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, they are vigorous. Before the midwife can come to them, they have given birth. And God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied greatly. And because the midwives feared God, he established households for them. Then Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every boy that is born you shall throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. So here's the structure of this narrative so far. Taskmasters and oppressions. Human beings respond in their strength, in their dexterity, in their devotion. Pharaoh has the resources, part 3, to impose even more draconian circumstances on the people. Now there's going to be genocide. Chapter 2. A certain man of the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. The woman conceived, bore a son. When she saw it, it hid him for 3 months, couldn't hide him any longer, got a wicker basket, caulked him with, and so on, put the child into it in the Nile, and his sister stationed herself at a distance to learn what would befall. Human action, right? Seeing a dangerous situation, this mother and her daughter, Moses' sister, cleverly develop a response to this. Okay? The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the Nile while her maidens walked among them. She spied the basket among the reeds, sent her slave girl to fetch it. When she opened it, she saw it was a child, a boy crying. She took pity on it. Oh my goodness. Who is acting responsibly? Moses' mother? Moses' sister? Pharaoh's daughter? Human beings, both Jewish and non-Jewish, can combine their efforts to solve a situation. She took pity on it. To me, that's the, maybe I shouldn't exaggerate. Here's the exaggeration. The greatest verse in the Bible, overcoming the Bible's dualism between the good guys and the bad guys. The Egyptians are the bad guys. And yet, somebody right from the heart of the bad guys expresses pity for a child. That's one of your highest moral categories, compassion. And she does it. Alan? Did you have a question?
No,
Comment?
I just noted that she did it without being directed by God.
There you go. Human action, model 1. What have we seen so far? We've seen oppression and then the outbreaking of model 1. Then we've seen heightened oppression and we've seen the outbreaking again of model 1. The situation is dire, but human beings respond successfully. Human possibility. She took pity. This must be a Hebrew child. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go get you a Hebrew nurse to suckle the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter answered, "Yes." So the girl went and called the child's mother. Yeah, this, I've always thought, is an anticipation of the defeat of the Egyptians. Pharaoh is defeated right here in a very circumscribed way. But we can see how human action can defeat tyranny, at least metaphorically. Because this is a brilliant solution to the problem, right? Get the guy, the kid, the baby's mother, and have the Egyptians sponsor it. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it for me," on verse 9. So the woman went and did it. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, made him her son. She named him Moses, explaining, "I drew him out of water." Sometime after that, Moses had grown up. He went out to his kinsfolk and witnessed their labors. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his kinsmen. Of tyranny, or at least violence against the Hebrews. He turned this way and that, and seeking no one about, he struck down the Egyptian, hid him in the sand. When he went out the next day, he found 2 Hebrews fighting. He said to the offender, "Why do you strike me? Who made you chief and ruler? Do you mean to kill me?" As he killed him, Moses was frightened and thought the matter was known. When Pharaoh learned of the matter, he sought to kill Moses, but Moses fled. He arrived in the land of Midian. Okay? So, let's do it in terms of major key, minor key. Major key, an optimistic approach to music. Minor key, a more doleful approach. Yeah? And we have here in this story so far an oscillation between major and minor. Here we're in a minor key again. When Pharaoh learned of the matter. Danger. Now, let's skip over a little bit. Verse 23. So Moses hightails it out of there. He goes to Jethro. He marries Zipporah. A long time, verse 23, after that, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites were groaning under the bondage and cried out, and their cry for help from bondage rose up to God. So this is a pivotal moment in our discussion, isn't it? Human action has done some good things. But the matter now seems dire enough that for all the positive effects of human action, their situation is still extremely dire. And what do? They groan. Now, it's possible to overinterpret this. Let me try not to. Overinterpretation would be, they've given up. I don't want to quite say that. And yet, human action does not seem to have turned the tide, and its lack has eventuated in despair. And God heard their moaning. And God remembered his covenant with Abraham, and God looked upon the Israelites, and God took notice of them. Chapter 3, verse 7. This is after the call of Moses. God calls Moses. In other words, God now becomes a principal, if not the principal actor. And he is now going to use a human being to accomplish his own purposes. It's the structure without the content of the Messiah. The God calls an individual to do something extraordinary. Now, Moses is not the Messiah, but Moses is now called upon to do something extraordinary. And Moses recognizes how extraordinary it is, because he doesn't want to do it. Right? This is the first example of prophetic reluctance. Jeremiah, call somebody else. Right? And God responds to him, I can't do it. I called you when you were still in the womb. It's not a choice anymore. Right? And so on. So Moses recognizes how dire the situation. You want me to be the head of the Federal Reserve when inflation is running out of control? I don't want to do it. I'd like to stay in my office at Princeton and teach my classes and write my articles. This job is a no-win situation. I'm going to have to raise the interest rates, and everybody's going to blame Joe Biden. I don't want to do it. That's Moses. Verse 7. And the Lord continued, I have marked well the plight of my people in Egypt, have heeded their outcry because of their taskmasters. Yes, I'm mindful of their sufferings. I've come down to rescue them from the Egyptians and to bring them out of that land to a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the region of the Canaanites, the Hittites, and so on and so on. I'm not going to take them out, I'm going to bring them in. How hard is it to bring them in? It's a breeze. It's an 11-day walk from Egypt to Israel. Going to be harder than that. Going to take 40 years. And what does the book of Numbers specialize in? Rebellion. We don't want to continue this journey. We'd like to go back to Egypt. Give us a plate full of leeks and cucumbers. I'll take slavery any old day. God has to stay with the process, or it falls aground. And Moses anticipates that without knowing for sure. Verse 9. The cry of the Israelites has reached me. Moreover, I've seen how the Egyptians oppress them. Come, therefore, I'll send you to Pharaoh, and you shall free my people, the Israelites, from Egypt. God intercedes. God sees. Let's go back to verse 23 of chapter 2. A long time after that, the king died, and so on, their cry came up to God, and God heard and remembered his covenant. Rupture. God enters the scene. Why? Well, maybe you'll think I'm riding my hobby horse here, but here's my response. Human action, which has been efficacious, hasn't solved the problem. And so God recognizes that, I might say, and decides to break into the historical process and do the work himself, footnote, through a human being. That's for sure. That's for sure. Let's continue now a little bit. Now, verse 11. But Moses said to God, and here are all his complaints. And in what follows, Moses is sent to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, who is this guy? God, who is this God? And so on and so on. Then, now I want to go to chapter 5. Afterward, Moses and Aaron went and said to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go that they may celebrate a festival for me in the wilderness. But Pharaoh said, who is the Lord that I should heed him and let Israel go? So now we've got a contest between the real God and the pretender. Because Pharaoh thinks that he's equal to God. Who is this guy? I don't know the Lord, nor will I let Israel go. And they answered, the God of the Hebrews manifested himself. Let us go a distance of 3 days into the wilderness to sacrifice to the Lord our God, and so on and so on. And Pharaoh, verse 5, said, the people of the land are already so numerous, and you'd have them cease from their labors. That same day the Pharaoh charged the taskmasters and the foremen of the people, saying, you shall no longer provide the people with straw. The situation has gotten worse and worse for the people. Now no more straw. Verse 8. But impose upon them the same quota of bricks as they have been making heretofore. Don't reduce it, for they are shirkers. And that's why they cry, let us go and sacrifice. Let heavier work be laid upon the men, and let them keep at it and not pay attention to deceitful promises. The passivity of the people intensifies. So the taskmasters, verse 10, and foremen of the people went out and said to the people, thus says Pharaoh, I won't give you any straw. You must go get the straw for yourselves wherever you find it, but no decrease whatever in your work. Then the people scattered throughout the land of Egypt to gather the stubble for straw. And the taskmasters pressed them, saying, you must complete the same work assignment each day as when you had straw. Human initiative vanishes. And the foremen of the Israelites, whom Pharaoh's taskmasters had set over them, were beaten. Why, they were asked, did you not complete the prescribed amount of bricks, either yesterday or today as you did? Then the foremen of the Israelites came to Pharaoh and cried, why did you deal thus with your servants? No straw is issued to your servants, yet they demand of us make bricks. Thus your servants are being beaten when the fault is with your people, is with your own people. In other words, they come to Pharaoh through the initiative of human action and possibility. We're going to use our own actions to appeal to Pharaoh's humanity. Verse 17, he replied, you are shirkers. This is why you say, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. Be off now to your work. No straw shall be issued to you, but you must produce your quota of bricks. Now the foremen of the Israelites found themselves in trouble because of the order. You must not reduce your daily quantity of bricks. They left Pharaoh's presence. They came upon Moses and Aaron standing in their path, and they said to them, may the Lord look upon you and punish you for making us loathsome to Pharaoh and his courtiers, putting a sword in their hands to slay us. Our situation is terrible. We've heard that human action has had an effect in the past, and you've tried it, but you're making it worse for us. We can't count even on you to help us. Go home and study Torah and leave us alone. That's how bad it's become, and how pessimistic and despairing the people are. Then Moses returned to the Lord and said, "O Lord, why did you bring harm upon this people? Why did you send me? Ever since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has dealt worse with his people, and still you have not delivered your people." So, what do we have here? We have continuity. Human beings try to do stuff, and they accomplish some stuff. But the continuity idea falls to the ground. It becomes impossible to engage in further human activity. Option one is over. There's no solution to their dilemma and their tragedy. And yet a solution comes. God takes them out of Egypt. God defeats Pharaoh. Is this not rupture? Is this not the entire non-value at this moment in the halachic human initiative solution to our problems? Hasn't the author painted just this picture of despair, of people become immobile, and they blame their leaders? Would you say this is rupture? What do you, Gary? I hate to put you on the spot here. What do you think actually? Do you think the rupture idea has been vindicated at this moment?
Well, truly, this is a point of ultimate despair.
Yeah.
I think you made that point. God has put leadership in the hands of Moses, but Moses has had very limited impact to that point. He hasn't been able to get his point across to Pharaoh. So they are at an impasse. So this is at a point where a messianic approach perhaps is the only answer.
Right.
So
And-
is that a point of rupture? I guess so.
Yeah, okay. I guess so, yeah.
It's certainly an inflection point at the minimum, and I guess you could call it a point of
Yeah. Now, the other side, though, in support of your position of continuity, is for all of its failure, human beings have attempted to resolve their problems. So what has emerged here, along with practical passivity, is the human spirit, which has tried to solve its problems. This now becomes the presupposition for the possibility of the second paradigm, Mount Sinai. God can't command us to do something and to act on our own behalf unless we have the capacity to act. If it had been a rock rather than Moses, and the situation had run aground, we would say there's no possibility of the resumption of human responsibility, because the rock can't respond to commandments. Human beings have shown themselves able to respond, and even though human actuality, human actual efficacy has failed, what has not failed is the possibility of human efficacy. In other words, the Exodus story reveals the rupture view of history while laying the presupposition for the covenantal view of history. Had human beings not been able to act at all in these stories, we might have said our hands are in God, we're in God's hands, period. We can do nothing. But that's not the whole story. In other words, human action fails, but the possibility of human action remains alive. So the Exodus, as well as being a paradigm in its own right, is a presupposition for the Sinai imperative. And so what do we have here? A possible complementarity. It's not an either or. It's that the Jewish tradition countenances the possibility of, let's call it, covenantal action, human responsibility, in relationship with the God who calls us to action. We could say at this point we have two paradigms that are incommensurable with one another. It's one or the other. It's either that parallel lines don't meet until infinity, that's Euclidean geometry, or parallel lines do meet before infinity. That's spherical geometry. If you put your lines on a globe, great circles meet twice around the globe. So it's either Euclidean geometry or non-Euclidean geometry. You can't have both. It's either Exodus or Sinai. You can't have both. No, it is both. And they happen consecutively. So I think what Hartman is trying to show us is we have two great paradigms of hope in the book of Exodus at the foundation of Jewish historical memory, which gives us the possibility of two kinds of hope. But they are also connected to each other in a deeper, more synthetic way. So we want to continue following this. I hope you feel as I do. I mean, we're studying Torah here, but here we're finding in Torah major views of how to exhibit Jewish hope, I might say. Malcolm?
A couple of comments. One, you talked about coming up with a Messiah either occasioned by everyone lighting candles or no one lighting candles.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure with regard to this dire circumstance in Egypt, which was the case.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
And maybe it doesn't matter.
Okay.
But you could argue that despite all the efforts of the people of Israel, they were all lighting candles, yet human capacity didn't prevail in terms of accomplishing what the Israelites needed to do, that is to get free from the forces of Pharaoh. So God, because of his covenant with Abraham, says, I got to do something here.
Right.
These guys are not going to get out of this on their own. So then Sinai says, look, here's what I did for you in Egypt. Now, and remember, that was part of my covenant with you.
Yeah.
And here's the other part of it. We have a covenant. This didn't go away. And I fulfilled my part of the bargain, my commitment to you.
Yeah, no, I think that's very good. And you're pointing to I took you out of Egypt, therefore I'm going to command you, also shows the connection between the two paradigms, the two episodes. The covenant, I think, in Genesis, I'm going to say it and then I'm going to be thinking about it, is largely unilateral. God makes a bunch of promises. Do the Israelites do stuff back? Is it a bilateral? Yeah, God says to Abraham, go, and Abraham goes. He says, circumcise your sons, and Abraham does. That seems to be bilateralism. But I think the rest of it is human beings on their own with God coming in and out of the picture. I think your allusion to this Sabbath business is in a way misleading in terms of what we have accomplished since. And that is, it poses a dichotomy, either or. And I'm trying to make the case here that even though this Exodus story wants to focus on the power of God's insertion into history, it wants to pose strongly in its own terms an alternative to the efficacy of human action. And therefore it may exaggerate for the sake of underlining this. It will occur, of course, soon that human beings will come back into play. So my point here is that it's not the either or of all Jews doing the Sabbath or not doing. That little midrash, kind of hardens the dichotomy. We can do it ourselves. How hard is it to light the candles and come to shul? By the way, in a technological era like ours, coming to shul can mean sitting at home with a glass of wine in your pajamas and you get credit. If all Jews watch the Kabbalat Shabbat service in their pajamas, the Messiah will come. Okay. Yeah. Alan?
I just want to say that, they could have asked God for more straw. So the term rupture, I think, is appropriate.
Why? Oh, I'm surprised by that conclusion. What do you mean by that?
Well, what I'm saying is that if you asked for more straw, we still would have been slaves in Egypt. Because we had enough straw to make the bread. But God didn't give you straw. God said, get out of here.
Okay.
Rupture.
That was the rupture. That's an interesting point. God doesn't want continuity at this point, of the continuity of their situation.
Well,
Isn't that what you're saying?
It seemed to me that God is opposed to slavery.
So far, he seems just to be opposed to Israelite slavery.
Well, give him a chance.
Well, that's for sure. God will tell us to care for the stranger, which comes because you were strange in the land. But so far, this is a highly particularistic story, right? Isn't it true? Yeah. Yes, Vivian?
That's where we invented it.
Exactly.
This may be another
Invention, by the way, we invent in order to discover.
Yeah. Okay.
Our stories help us to discover. Just like we command ourselves in order to discover ourselves as responsible agents. We might not know unless we had a commandment, either to obey or not. So our stories are inventions through which we find out who we are and what it means to be a human being. These are supreme fictions, in Wallace Stevens' term. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the stories, because I was just going to say this is another case of rising to the story. If we read Exodus as a second creation story, people of Israel. And I'm wondering, is not the covenant at work from the start?
Yes.
In rescuing the Moses, and the resolve of the midwives. That is generational. We open with the covenant at work with the fact that Jews are not going to die in this, even in this.
I would say.
I mean, yeah.
You're pushing me here.
Okay.
I would say that the covenant is more stipulative than natural. In other words, the people do act, but are they acting as participants in a covenant? A covenant is more like when you come to an intersection, stop on red. Before it was stipulated, I had no need to do it. I might have inferred it after a couple of accidents. So yes, human beings act, but is it covenantal until they affirm? You see, at the Sinai thing, the people say, we will do it. Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do it. In other words, before that moment, there's not covenantal responsibility. Under the chuppah, I do. That's the marriage. Before that, even though they're in love and they feel like it's a union, so the marriage is a stipulated action and not sort of an emergent or natural, something like that? What do you think?
I think that I wouldn't take anything away from the consummation, if you will, at Sinai. That is the covenant, you know. There's no, I like the organization of this, but I'm saying the seeds of that are from the start of.
Seeds of that, for sure. That's for sure. And that was my point as well, as the story of the human action run aground, from which we might infer it meant nothing, to what I think is really the case. It shows us the capacity of human beings in more felicitous circumstances to engage in efficacious action. The seeds are there, but it's not yet ripe.
Right, and the power of the action is throughout all, you know, the whole exchange between Moses and Pharaoh and God.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah, right. At first chapter of Genesis, when human beings are created in God's image. Remember, we did this very early in the year and asked ourselves, what does it mean to be made in God's image? And the answer, at least the one I proposed, was, well, let's see what God does in chapter 1. And what God does now becomes the content of the image that of which we are. And one of them is the possibility of independent action. So human capacity is